You're listening to the Hello World Podcast, number 67. My name is Sean Wildermuth, and I'm your host. The Hello World Podcast is where you can hear from some of your favorite developers, authors, and speakers about how they got started in this business and the decisions they made along the way. We go way back to their first computer, their first code experience, and their first job. We decided not to have a sponsor for the podcast, but if you want to support the podcast and the kinds of things that I do, feel free to visit my Pluralsight courses at seanw.me/PSAuthor, including my newest course on building a web app with ASP.NET Core. We're currently in Boston on our road trip. This road trip is covering 25 cities in North America and Europe. We'll be doing live interviews of some of your favorite developers, including Julie Yack, Miguel Icaza, and David Giard. We have other episodes from the road trip already available, including ones from Tim Huckabee and Scott Guthrie. See hwroadtrip.com for more information on joining me for a live taping of this podcast, including the city and dates. Today's guest is Rui Carvalho. Rui is a software craftsman, mostly working on Microsoft and web areas for the past 20 years, from the early ASP 2.0 days to the latest ASP.NET Core stuff. After a long time acting as a consultant for big companies, he focuses today on developing, teaching, and mentoring teams on smaller projects like startups to build up the right products with simplicity. He speaks at different conferences about .NET, web, agility, and developer practices. He also advocates for open source and open minds in the .NET community, and that's why today he leads the Alt.NET group in France. Since 2014, he has organized a professional developers conference in Paris called NCrafts, with a strong focus on new technologies, great practices in design, and more globally about crafting software with love. We were in Paris for this podcast, and it was great to speak to a lot of developers, even when their first language wasn't English. I'd heard great stories about Rui, and he gave me a different perspective on what it's like to live outside the U.S. and grow up with software in mind. You will notice that this podcast ends a bit abruptly, as we did have a technical issue, but I think Rui's story is too interesting not to share everything we did actually get on tape. Let's take a listen. I think you'll enjoy this one. Well, welcome everyone here in Paris. Welcome. It is really, really exciting to be here. I've visited Paris as well as other parts of France, like Strasbourg and Côte d'Azur, quite a lot. But I've never done a talk in Paris, in France at all. It's kind of weird.
So welcome.
Thank you. So it was always a little nerve-wracking because I don't speak French, as you all have learned pretty much.
Yeah, but we don't speak English too, so it doesn't matter.
That's funny. So as the audience here is mostly French, I assume, if you don't understand what I'm saying in English, just nod along like you are. It's mostly to just make my ego feel better. I appreciate it. So today's guest, I'm really excited, is Rui Carvalho.
Yes,
Carvalho. Good. I'm always afraid I'm going to get that part wrong. And we spoke a lot through emails when trying to set all this stuff up. And I was interested in how kind of you got started, because I know of you you've spoken at a lot of the like French Tech Days and some other events, and you were in the ASP.NET world. But when you got started, was it something where you had a computer growing up in the house? I mean, what made you know you were a developer? Passion, really?
Passion, maybe. I think it's really what used to drive me, in fact. And when I was young, I really didn't have a computer at home. Mm-hmm. In France, we had a program in the 80s called Programming for Everyone. I don't remember exactly the name, mm-hmm. but we introduced computing and programming at school when we were 7, 8, 10 years old.
And what kind of computers do they have in the schools?
It was French computers. It was
French computers.
Thomson TTO-set. And,
really? Never heard of those.
Yeah, I can imagine. But they were really interesting computers for family, and they were at that time really exciting.
Oh, really?
And we used to program that in some strange basic, something like that. But we also had optical pens. It worked with optical pens, so it was very advanced in terms of user interface and things like that. But and I really started learning programming at when I was 10, 12, something like that, because of that program we had at school.
And what sort of things were you programming? Just like things that the teachers were giving you assignments, or did you like go off on your own? And
no, it was very, very basic things. It used to be at my school. It was done by a math teacher.
Yeah, same in the States.
So it was mainly some algorithms and few basic things like that.
And did you know when you started with this very basic language that you could make the computer do things? I mean, was that part of that excitement, sort of that control, or?
It was, in fact, at that time, graphics were not that much terrible, and we used to draw. We were able to draw boxes and lines and things like that, but it was very, very hard. And my biggest problem at that time, it was I got a ZX81 from a friend, and it was a very, very basic computer.
Yes.
And I didn't add the extension to be able to record my programs. So it was very, very painful to do something, because you have to write everything and then stop and then do it again.
Yes. And hope the power doesn't go out.
No. So yeah, at that time I did some very small algorithms and draw some boxes, and then I didn't touch a computer for programming until I was I think 16, 17, something like that.
And is in that age, are you close to university, or is that like
not
high
yet,
school here?
Not yet. It was high school, and I at that time I didn't have a computer yet, but I had a calculator, HP 48.
Oh yeah.
You know, it was a great calculator, and we used to do programming in that calculator, and it was really amazing the things that people were able to do with that. And then I really started programming and be really interested on the things that we are able to do with the computer when I was in university. And I was, I think, 20-something. Mm-hmm. And I didn't came to computer because of programming. I came to computers because of music.
Oh, interesting.
It was 94, 95, something like that.
So you came there because of like MIDI and electronic music, or was it more the recording?
Yeah, in fact, there is 2 points. Because my parents didn't want to buy me a computer before, because they thought that I will only play games with it. So they wait that I'm at the university, so they thought that, okay, now he's at the university, so he will do only serious stuff with that. But it was not the case, obviously. No. And then at that time I was really much more interested in music, and I also started with electronic music,
Nice.
programming music, and so on. And yeah, it was also the early days of HTML. So if you want to produce music at that time, you didn't have online platforms and so on, but the use was to produce a CD-ROM with some kind of HTML presenting you stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So that's how I started. So it was 95, something like that.
Yeah.
That's when I started really programming HTML.
And I love when people today talk about how tough web development is and HTML, but 4 and 5 in terms of difficulty is nothing like it was in 95. In 95, what?
It was the most difficult thing was not technical. The most difficult thing at that time was that there is no one with you can speak with.
Yeah.
There is no one you can explain your problems. It was difficult to have some information online, and you don't solve that at school. So it was not taught at university.
Oh, wow.
So when I started learning by myself HTML, and it was amazing. I remember the first time when I wrote some basic HTML and saw things grow on live on my browser. It was really amazing. But I spent a lot of time with that, and after some time I discovered that there is some crazy people that are generating HTML on the server side and creating things with servers to give HTML to people.
Yeah.
Not writing HTML by hand.
Every line, every page being its own thing.
It was something crazy, because at that time, you remember, it was something different. We now it's difficult to imagine how it was at that time. Because you discover HTML, you start writing HTML, and you see things happen. Okay, but when you imagine that there is servers, that people programming servers with strange things like databases, and they generate dynamically some pages and so on. It was a crazy idea, and I spent a lot of time trying to understand that, because I didn't know anything about HTTP and things like that. Because it's not only the problem that writing HTML code is, you have to understand how things work, how things communicate, to be able to understand how how to produce dynamic content from server side.
Yeah, because at first when I was playing in sort of the web in the late 90s, it just felt like a file server, right? Oh, in order to have my first website, I'm going to have an HTML page and any other files that page needs. The idea that they weren't coming to find a file, that they were giving me requests, right? That whole concept took a long time for to really get in my head and to accept it.
It was very difficult, and when I was at university, I have a great chance to start working with a very small company, and I worked for them 12 hours a week, which was really great, because it fits really well with school. And one of we did different things. We tried to teach HTML to people. It was also Cyber Coffee. And we also sell PC material.
Oh, nice.
So when I started there, my job was to take an Excel or Access file with all the components from the big seller that sell us the products, and write all the HTML every week, because prices and so on change every week. And after some time we started thinking, but various people doing things on the server and generating these pages dynamically, and that's when I started ASP2. It was ASP2, IIS 3 or 4, something like that, and SQL Server 6.5. I think it was 97, 98.
Yeah, that would be about right.
Something like that, and that's when I started writing ASP.NET pages.
Wow. And using Visual Basic on the server?
Yes, it was mostly VBScript. ASP.NET page, classic ASP.NET page.
And at what point during that process, because for me there were sort of those three, in web development there were sort of these three ages in my head. Mm-hmm. One was the web is all files, right? Mm-hmm. And then there was, I have the server. Mm-hmm. And then there's that third phase, which was, I can do stuff on the client as well, right? Yeah. There's that, the browser isn't just for displaying this content, but actually, working with the user. Did you have that moment at that job?
Yes, and it came after the server side. The first thing was, as you said, I can do HTML. Okay. Right. Then the second thing was, I can generate dynamic content from the server. Then after sometimes you find some difficult things and very ugly things to display, and you start, but maybe it was the beginning of CSS, it was the beginning of JavaScript, and I remember in 99 I started doing Ajax because it was the first version of XML HTTP with HTML IIA 4 or 5, I don't remember, but it was something like that, and I started doing Ajax calls and updating my pages dynamically in 99. So when Ajax came like a magic thing in 2005, we could already do that kind of things a long time before.
But you had to write everything.
You have to write everything.
It wasn't as easy as it got later.
And it was really painful. That's when I started thinking about what I can do inside the page, in fact.
Yeah, because there was that moment, because I'd worked on a lot of different operating systems, a lot of client code, and there was that moment when you figured out, wait, the browser is another platform, right? It didn't matter what the operating system was, it really mattered what the browser could do. Yeah. And did you stay with that company after you graduated, or was that just
it was really a small company. It was very close to my house, and it was only one person. So it was very nice to work there during. It was for 1 or 2 years, and after that I continue university. But I was in an internship in a big company.
Oh, nice!
Because it was easier. It was easier for me, in fact. Yes. Because in that mode, you have to full-time school, and you have to work 12 hours, and these 12 hours were supposed to do homework for university. Mm-hmm. So when you do an internship, it's easier because you are paid for that, and it's on your daytime. So it was easier, and then I spent 2 years in it was Alcatel headquarters at that time.
And that's a Telecom, right?
Yeah.
Alcatel? Yeah. Okay.
It was a great moment because it was before 2001, and between 99 and 2001, inside the headquarters of a big company like that, it was just crazy.
I'm sure. That was everything was changing at that time. Is that when you started figuring out how to work with other developers? Because probably at this 12-hour job, it was the one guy and you were probably being leaned on to do most of the technical, right?
Yeah.
So at Alcatel, did you...
No, not there, because I was quite alone also, because in fact, I didn't learn computer science at university. Right. It was a telecom study.
Oh, okay.
So I supposed to be a network and telecom engineer.
Okay. Yeah.
And so the team that I worked for, they searched for someone that are able to program stuff for the web and to understand telecoms and networking.
Oh, right.
So it was a very specific job, just for me, in fact.
Oh, right.
And being able to work with team and publish things online. It was my job, so I was mostly alone at that time.
And when you decided to leave there and go to your next job, because that was a full-time after university job, right? I mean, that was your first job?
It was my internship.
Oh, that was your internship.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. And so did you finish a degree in telecom?
Yes.
In networking? Okay. And did you figure out during college that you wanted to do more programming than networking?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it was quite crazy because I used to study networking, electronics, telecoms, but I was really passionate by programming.
Yeah,
and it was very hard to find the right balance. And then I preferred to move to programming. But in fact, it was more complicated than that, because when I finished my graduation, it was in September 2001.
Not a good time to graduate.
Exactly. So my first opportunity was to work for some kind of small company that were doing some recommendations for banks on the technical directions they have to take about telecoms. So the job was to write papers about the new telecom technologies and so on. I was accepted at that job, and it was really something that I love to do. But in fact, after September, they called me and they told me that it's a bad time for juniors.
Yes.
So now we are closing all the new juniors, and we are taking seniors and more commercials because we think that times will be bad.
Yeah.
So
and they were.
In fact, and that's why after that I found a small company to start programming. In fact.
Oh, nice.
And that's how it started.
It's interesting because I've been in software since '86, I guess. So whatever that is. This 30? Yeah, it's 30 years this year. Wow. I'm old.
No, you started young. It's different.
I did start young when I was 30. So when I was 9. No, that's not true. There's really been, as the economy went up and down, there were always programming jobs. Yeah. Either they want software to help them sell more in an up economy or to save them money in a down economy. And so it's been one of those jobs that I was really excited about, because there was right after 9/11, there was a 2-month stretch that I didn't have work, and it's only 2 months in 30 years I haven't been able to find work. And that to me is one of the gifts of this industry. So, did you find your passion about software? A lot of it surrounded, sort of the web. So you that was what you were passionate about. This idea of delivering stuff over the web? I mean, was it?
Yeah,
because that involves a lot of different sort of pieces. I meet some people whose passion is C++, or their passion is databases or whatever. Yours was sort of this holistic.
Yeah. In fact, that was my first passion, and I am very passionate by art also.
Oh, nice.
So design is very important for me.
Oh, nice.
And doing the web part is the best way to design things.
Because you could feed both parts. You could have that technical problem over here, but also the sort of aesthetic problem.
Yeah,
That's interesting for you.
Exactly. And also you have to think about user experience and so on. And now that that websites are much bigger, you have also scale problems and so on. So it's a very complete job, I think today. But in fact, after some time, I moved to SQL programming.
Oh, nice.
For many years, I was in that field. For many years.
So were you in the writing access to the database or actual DBA sort of SQL?
I try to argue for a job that most people don't understand and don't know, which is database programmer. Because most people, it's always a fight between developers and DBAs.
Yeah.
And most of the time it's because there is no one in the between that understands both worlds. And programming databases is a really important skill because it's not only about how can I install new instances of database, how many disks I need and so on. Writing queries is really an art for me.
It is.
And I try to work in that field in that way because it's important for teams to have specialized people that help and can talk with DBAs and can talk with regular developers and so on. And
understand the needs of both.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
That's often sort of the battle there.
Exactly. And also trying to push better practice for SQL because it was maybe between 2006 and 2009, something like that. And we at that time we started to use version control for database scripts and so on. So you can have great and good practices for databases too, and you can have good programming skills at writing SQL code, and it's very important because it's not only about performance. If you think about how we try to craft our code today, you can also craft in a good way your SQL code.
Yeah, I would really agree with you there. It's interesting because we went through this phase for a while where everyone thought the database, whatever the database is just serialization, and that just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And now sort of we're in this place where people think that the solution is NoSQL, and it's one of those interesting things in that if you look back in the history of databases, NoSQL is kind of where it started, right?
Yeah, it was before.
And there's still a space for both relational and but I think the push to NoSQL is this push of developers not wanting to understand relational databases.
Exactly.
So if I'm storing everything like I'm dealing with it in memory, it should be better. In theory, but it's one of those things that finding the right data store for the right job, relational is better in some cases, non-relational is better.
Yeah, and we have to what we used to call polyglot programming and polyglot storage, polyglot persistence. Sorry, and it's what we have to do because in fact, it's different storages for different needs, and it's important. And I defend NoSQL for a long time because people have to be more educated about that. You cannot. It's always strange for me that most people still now start their project by drawing a SQL database schema.
Right.
And you cannot think about that in the beginning of the project.
No.
You have to think about that much later when you know what data you are trying to persist.
Yes.
And that's why I argue for NoSQL. But now I'm trying to, I will do something around SQL because I think that because of NoSQL, people just started to completely throw SQL database, and it shouldn't be like that. You still need a SQL database for some needs where they perform better. And what I saw also is that a lot of young people completely forgot or maybe never learn the art of writing queries.
Yes.
because most juniors now started dealing with database through an ORM,
Right.
and most of the time they don't know about programming SQL. And I think it's a competence that people should get back.
Because ultimately you have to debug SQL whether you write it or not, right? I mean, the idea that people are using RRMs, which have their place and are great in a lot of places, but often need to tune into that. Ultimately, when you're in a production environment and you're having a performance problem or even a bug problem, you need to understand what is either being generated for you or that has been written for you.
Yeah, people, in fact, you have great tools on SQL Server, and you can understand, launching performance monitor and profiler and so on. It's things that people need to do when they work with SQL Server.
Yeah.
And most people just don't know that because they used to be developers. They don't know that these tools exist because they used to be from the DBA side.
Absolutely.
And I think it's things that we need to perform better and try to learn again and try to progress in that way.
I think that's absolutely true. So as you continued your career, you said you get into sort of the database developer space. At what point did you start working with other people, whether you were managing them or even in a team? Because I think that's a skill.
It was before that. In fact, I started as an ASP developer, and in 2001 I was lucky enough to go to a company to learn ASP.NET, the beta of ASP.NET 1.0. So I started ASP.NET at that moment, and after some times I changed the company and go to a smaller one. And because it was a smaller company, we have to do a lot of different things. And after a few years, I started managing people and also doing all my SQL stuff.
Sure.
Because I at that moment I was still passionate about programming, but because I was in a small company, I have to do all the things.
Yeah.
And what I always try to do is try to find the best thing to do wherever you are.
Right.
If you are in a small company and you have to do a lot of stuff that you don't agree or you don't like because it's a small company and there is a limited number of people and stuff have to be done. Always try to enjoy and find what you can learn new.
Yeah.
And that's why I moved from ASP stuff, because at that moment I had nothing more to learn.
Yeah.
So I started doing SQL programming, and after some time I started to drive a team because it was an opportunity to learn a new thing. But after some times, I decided to return to web programming because it was more interesting for me.
Well, and also there was that era where web programming became palatable again, sort of the post jQuery and in the 90s, especially dealing with cross browser issues. I remember being at a company. A million plus hits a day company. It was a really big company, and their lab had a computer for every operating system, every version of the operating system, and every browser on that operating system. Now, if you've ever done that test matrix to see, it was enormous, and they just had people hammering on each one of these. They'd have a QA person per operating system and browser to just see if it continued to work, because it was so difficult. I think there were more lines of code that said if browser name than anything else.
It was very ugly at that time.
Yeah. So I actually did sort of the same thing. I sort of left web development, and then in the post jQuery sort of place when I was like, oh, it's not a nightmare anymore. I sort of came back to sort of, this isn't nearly as bad as it was?
I didn't came immediately because at that time there was web forms.
Yes.
And I really have painful times with web forms.
Yes.
And I really started to do web programming in Microsoft platform around 2008, 2009 with the first betas of ASP.NET MVC.
Nice.
And that's when I started really to try to better my practices also, because it was MVC was also an opportunity to have better decoupling and testing and so on. So at that time I also discovered a lot of things around programming, not only the fact that there is we can write things that work, but we can write also things that are well written for most people. And all the stuff around testing, around I started hexagonal architectures and things like that, and it was very interesting for me because it was people were still working with ASP.NET web forms, and
still are today.
In fact, and I really discovered a different way of doing things, and something that I was comfortable with.
Right.
Because, now I can write stuff that makes sense, because HTTP is someone calling something and get some text in return.
Right.
That's only what it's about.
Right.
And doing the things with web forms was just crazy. The idea that, you can draw some boxes and develop stuff for the web just like you do in WinForms, it's just a crazy idea, because people will have a lot of problems because they don't understand that when you write the on-click stuff, it's not an on-click event on the web page. You have to generate JavaScript, you have to call the server, you have to get information back from the server and so on. So it was really a crazy idea. And working with MVC was really something that was very nice. You can write all the stuff, you understand exactly what is HTTP call, what you have to do with it.
It was mapping back to HTTP instead of trying to hide it, which is a lot of what web forms was trying to do.
And we were also able to test things in a nice way. You
mean, when you say test things in the right way, you mean not just put them on a live server? Because that's, I think, how we still test a lot of things.
We were able to unit testing all the stuff, and also to write the code in TDD mode. That's when I started all that kind of things.
That's great. That's great. Thanks for listening to the Hello World Podcast. Remember, you can subscribe to the Hello World Podcast at